An NHS trust is under fire because it appears that they are indirectly, at least, discriminating against children because they attend a private school. Yes, you heard that right. It appears that an NHS trust is discriminating, at least indirectly, for reasons I'll explain in my opinion in this video, against children because they attend a private school. That is the allegation. They've been approached for comment by The Standard, which is where I read this story here that's been sent to us to discuss, and so here I am discussing it. So we are here on my main channel for law, so please do subscribe for detailed analysis on law. I'll show you why I think what I've just said, and if you want some brutally honest commentary on political matters, you can now find those over on my brand new channel, to which over 35,000 of you have subscribed in the last 36 hours. I can't thank you enough. That is BlackBeltBarrister, off the record. I'll link that below. And of course, you've got my secrets channel, which I'm probably going to take back to martial arts. Do go and check that out as well. And of course, my wealth channel. Yes, I am going all out on YouTube. I enjoy doing these videos, so I am doubling down, tripling down, quadrupling down on this content. So let's take a look at this story here, because I'm absolutely horrified by this. Now, just to give this some context, this appears to have been established in November 2024, just last year. So after Labour got into power. Now, there's been a suggestion or an allegation that it is somehow emboldened them to discriminate, at least indirectly, against children because they go to a private school after the VAT hit on private schools, because it appears to have been a merger or acquisition in November 2024. So Kingston and Richmond NHS Foundation Trust. You can read about that there. I'm not going to go into detail on that, but let's go back to the story for a moment. So this mother blames the Labour's VAT raid on private schools for emboldening this NHS to deny her son treatment or help with this crippling joint condition. So she noticed that he was struggling to hold his pen and write properly because it appeared that he had a crippling pain, some kind of condition in his joints. So long story short, they wrote back to say, well, they filled in a form and it asked, where does the child go to school? And then ultimately, they wrote back to say that they've denied the appointment because they're only commissioned to provide service to mainstream schools. It says here, reportedly, this reads, we are unable to see this child as we do not provide a service to school-age children who attend independent schools. Now, you might think to yourself, that's ridiculous, for one, because going to an independent school does not mean that you're not paying in by way of taxes that supports the NHS trust, which gets its funding from the local authority. And you'd be right. But whilst it may not be directly discriminatory in that they are not saying this child has this, therefore we're going to treat them less favourably, it may be indirect, which I'll come back to in a minute. But I had to check this out for myself because I thought this can't possibly be right. So I do check these things. So I go straight to their website, Kingston and Richmond NHS Foundation Trust website here, for occupational therapy, which includes anything to do with, being able to do your everyday tasks and activities in whatever kind of occupational setting, doesn't just mean work, whatever kind of work setting or school setting that you are in. So this here is, they say they provide services to children and young people from 0 to 18 years old. Obviously, under 18, you are a child or young person, as it's sometimes referred to in law, who are experiencing functional difficulties at school, home, or during play. So you might think, great, they provide services to all children that are having functional difficulties. That might mean walking, standing, writing, etc. Anything to do with a functional movement, that would come under this sort of occupational therapy. So great. So I thought there doesn't seem to be a problem there so far, until I scour the website and I eventually do find the bit I couldn't believe my eyes. It's absolutely true. On their website, they say, what is the referral criteria? They say referrals will be considered by the service for preschool and school-age children and young people according to the following criteria. Parental care or consent is obtained. Sure. All preschool children with a Richmond GP. Stands to reason. You need to be registered with a GP. And then the bit in highlight here. All school-age children who are residents in the Richmond or Kingston boroughs, fine, fair enough, and attend a state-maintained Richmond school. This includes children who have an EHCP. Now, that's where I draw the line, because why should it make any difference whatsoever whether they attend a state-maintained school as opposed to an independent school? Because the fees that they pay to an independent school are over and above the taxes they pay that otherwise would fund their place in state school, which obviously they don't uptake. But otherwise, what difference does it make to this NHS trust? Now, the technical reason I'm guessing here, which I think will make sense, is that in the background somewhere, they obviously have to obtain funding. Now, this is pure guesswork on my part. They are free to get in touch with me and comment on it. I'm not a news company, so I'm no obligation to reach out to them for comment, but I'd be happy to pin it to this video if necessary. But my guess is that they obtain their funding by filling out forms and getting referrals from the school to show that this child is identified by the local authority and so on, and thus they send off documentation to get funding from the local authority for each child they treat. And they do that by having them on a list at a state-maintained school. That is my guess, because that would make sense. But that's wrong, in my view, because that then therefore excludes anyone that goes to a independent school, a private school that they pay for, that their parents pay for. And in my view, that could be, at the very least, indirectly discriminatory. Now, it's not going to be discriminatory because, for example, protected characteristics, age, sex, gender, sexual orientation, religion, etc. So to be directly discriminatory, it would have to be, we don't treat these children because of this characteristic. That'd be directly discriminatory, which would be unlawful. Indirect discrimination is often far more difficult to spot, sometimes more difficult to prove, but actually sometimes relatively easy to prove. And in my view, this is at grave risk of being indirectly discriminatory. Now, I will bring on screen, which I think would be helpful, the explanatory notes under the Equality Act to Section 19, which is the indirect discrimination. Now, the Section 19 indirect discrimination is set out here, which is where a person A discriminates a person B if A applies to B a provision, criterion, or practice. So the key words being here, a provision, criterion, or practice, which is discriminatory in relation to a relevant protected characteristic. So in the sense that said child has some sort of disability here, and the trust, being person A here, is discriminating against the child B if the trust is applying to the child a provision, criterion, or practice, which therefore results in them being treated less favourably. That is the indirect discrimination bit. Now, the explanatory notes here, it does a very good job of explaining it by looking at the effect. So the effect of indirect discrimination for the purposes of this act. So indirect discrimination occurs when a policy which applies in the same way for everybody has the effect which particularly disadvantages people with a protected characteristic. Where a particular group is disadvantaged in this way, a person in that group is indirectly discriminated against if he or she is put at the disadvantage unless the person is applying the policy can justify it. So unless they can justify this sort of discrimination, and by the way, I will foreshadow my thoughts on this, saying that the admin is a nightmare because we can't apply for the funding easily because the child goes to an independent school as opposed to a state school, so it's not all nice and neat in a little box here. That is not proportionate. That is not justification, in my view, because you can't just simply say, well, yes, this child didn't get the treatment, therefore they had to suffer because they went to a private school and they didn't fit on this list. So the admin was difficult and it was difficult to obtain the funding based on my guesswork as to what the reasoning is behind this. I don't know what the reasoning could be. What possible justification could there be to say those children go to a state school, those children go to a private school, there's a child from that school and a child from that school, both have a crippling joint condition, meaning that they are in extreme pain whilst they are writing, and we'll treat that one but not that one. The only difference being they go to, the criterion is they must go to a state school. So this, under the Act, as I said, if there's a criterion applied which results in them being treated less favourably, that is indirect discrimination. And so there it is. I'll link these below, but these things are often difficult to spot. Well, they're not so difficult when they spell it out on the website. We'll treat children at a state-maintained school, but not a private school. I don't think the lawyers looked at this one. And if they did, then with respect, they need to look at it again, because this is indirectly discriminatory in my view. And moreover, it's just unethical. How can you possibly justify not treating a child because they go to a private school? Bearing in mind my ongoing gripe about all this, because those that are paying for the private school are now also paying the VAT on top, subject to the outcome of the High Court case, and they are still paying the taxes in the normal way that go to the local authority that ultimately end up funding these services in the first place. So in my view, there is no possible justification for this. So I thank those of you that have sent me this story to comment on it, because I think this is indirectly discriminatory. It's a practice that needs to stop. They need to treat all these children in the same fair way, which you might expect an NHS trust to do. Those are my thoughts. Let me know if you've had stories like this. Please do remember to like this video and subscribe to my channel. Help me keep growing to give you the word on the law as I see it that it applies. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time.